This presentation will focus on previously homeschooled students who are now in college settings. To begin with, what is homeschooling? Homeschooling is defined as education at home guided by a parent or guardian rather than at a public or private school. The majority of homeschool families report obtaining curriculum from a homeschool catalog or publisher, but other sources include homeschooling organizations, religious groups, and even public school districts. While some parents are their child's only educator, about a third of homeschooled high school students enroll in online classes. Other methods of home education include dual enrollment at local schools, cooperative learning communities, often called co-ops, or autonomous learning, where students are responsible for creating their own learning environments. Homeschooling has grown as an educational approach over the past 30 years. By the early 1990s, all 50 states had laws in place allowing home education as long as it meets certain requirements. As homeschool has become a legal option for education, more parents are beginning to choose home education for a variety of reasons. But the two most common reasons are dissatisfaction with the traditional academic instruction at schools or a desire to create a certain environment for students, often associated with religious or moral beliefs. As the number of homeschooled students entering college increases, it's important for those in higher education to understand how homeschooled students' transition to college could differ from that of traditional students. Because of the varied approaches to homeschooling, these students bring diverse experiences to college campuses. Homeschooled students often have the freedom of a more flexible schedule during homeschool, which allows for experiences during the day that traditional students often don't have the time for. Research shows that homeschoolers were more likely than traditional students to have gained college credit and engage in community service. Many students in this subgroup also had more flexibility in the way material was taught. Home education allows for students and parents to make choices about the way content is presented and how learning is measured. Currently, there's often a stereotype associated with homeschooling that these students have lower levels of social competence. Almost 35% of admissions counselors at colleges believe homeschooled students will not cope as well socially as traditional students in college. However, research shows that homeschooled students were just as prepared overall for a transition into college, both socially and academically, as students who attended private or public schools. Those working with homeschooled students would benefit from understanding these students' capabilities, how they can transition, and their capacity to engage in healthy social relationships. But educators would also benefit from understanding how to guide these students through this developing time to a thriving community. My initial observations found that both of the students I interviewed approached their college education in very similar ways to their high school education. Madeline chose to take online classes, partly because it allowed her the same flexibility she had in high school. Becca, who emphasized her desire for independence in high school, deliberately chose to move out of her home and live in an own apartment while attending college. The learning environment each of them grew up in clearly affected the environment they chose to pursue in higher education, and it also affected the significance each student attached to their change. Social habits of each of the students varied, but a few patterns did stand out. Students who primarily interacted with other homeschooled students before college, like Callie and Madeline, tended to have more friends that were homeschooled. Another observation I made at an event for studying was that many of the students seemed to care less about what others thought of them at the event. They were less likely to notice whether or not they were in a quiet, study-only room or if they needed to lower their volume. One student explained that because they did not often find themselves in large groups prior to high school, they were not used to wondering how their actions were being perceived by others around them. Many of the homeschoolers agreed that college was one of the first times they experienced being in large groups that consisted of smaller, diverse groups. Homeschooling also played a big part in how the students viewed their own identity. When observing a few homeschooled students eating lunch, I noticed that they said things like, "It's because I'm homeschooled," or "the life of a homeschooler." Even without mentioning that I was studying this topic, they identified themselves with their educational upbringing. Academic transitions seemed to differ across the board. Callie, who was used to having a flexible academic schedule and being allowed to postpone different assignments, found it difficult to effectively manage her time and doing schoolwork when she first arrived. On the other hand, Ben, a business major, and Will, an engineer major, who both graduated with high grades and high test scores, found that the transition into college was rather smooth academically speaking. Ben's experience taking dual enrollment classes at his local high school and Will's co-op classes helped them understand the dynamics of learning in a larger group and gave them the foundation of self-motivation. While the behaviors I observed and the answers I received varied from student to student during this research, it's clear that each student's experience as a homeschooler affected their behaviors, attitudes, and perspectives in college. While many theories of development can be used to connect these observations back to the student's actions, three stand out as being prominent: Schlossberg's theory of transition, Chickering's theory of identity development, and Kolb's theory of experiential learning. When asked why she doesn't hang out much with other homeschooled students in college, Becca casually explained, "They're still in that life, still homeschooled." Becca's comment illustrates her perception of just how much her life has changed since coming to college. Becca chose to look at her enrollment in college as a transition to something different and move on from that life. For Becca, this meant rarely seeing her family, who lives just one town away, unlike the other homeschoolers she sees at college. Callie also mentions that leaving home to attend a college 4 hours away was quite a change. However, she also emphasized the importance of staying in contact with her family and friends back home, and said she picked Taylor because she believed it was very similar to the community-style education she was used to. Schlossberg's theory of transition speaks well to the importance of this perception during times of change, explaining that transitions only occur when an individual experiences it and perceives it as a significant change. Once a transition has been perceived, an individual's ability to cope with it rests on 4 factors: situation, self, support, and strategies. Once at college, Becca and Callie's role changed from an emphasis on family members to being simply students or friends, and both had to adjust to this new expectation. A lack of daily family interaction also impacted the type of support that both students received. They found that their support had shifted to campus resources, such as their RAs or professors. Callie and Becca illustrate 2 separate coping methods or strategies. Becca chose to modify the way in which she approached education, deciding to leave behind the family context of learning and fully embrace a separation between family life and schooling. Callie, however, chose to control the meaning of the problem, deciding that being distant from her family did not mean she had to break the connection between her family and learning. She often called home to share and reflect on her experiences and looked forward to times that her family could visit her at college. Developing a grounded sense of identity can be difficult for all college students. Chickering offers 7 different vectors that help college students develop identity, one being the development of mature interpersonal relationships. Growth in this vector will result in students' ability to form healthy and lasting relationships. Students who are developing mature relationships will be able to accept others for who they are and learn respect for those around them. Likewise, growth in this vector will influence growth in a second vector, moving through autonomy toward interdependence. Development in this area is key for many homeschooled students to learn how to disengage from relying on their parents and peers while gaining an appreciation and understanding of interdependence. Mature relationships with students from different backgrounds can help college students grow in a third vector, establishing an identity, the process by which students discover or confirm their core characteristics. What some stereotypes might label as social awkwardness might simply be, in some cases, a lack of experience engaging with those who are different or an unchallenged view of oneself. It would be wrong, though, to assume that all homeschooled students had limited interactions and relationships. Will and Ben both initiated relationships in other areas outside of their co-ops during homeschool, such as sports and music, which led them to internalize these experiences as part of their identity and also encouraged them to participate in different organizations and meet new people while at college. Activities that foster reflection and discussion about oneself amongst students will help them discover a meaningful lifestyle, grow in self-esteem, and establish the roles they believe are a significant part of their identity. Almost all of the students interviewed or observed expressed a level of flexibility within their homeschool education. Many of them were allowed to choose how, when, and even what to learn about. Each of them had a preferred learning style, be it online lectures, reading, or experiencing the concept for themselves. Kolb's theory of experiential learning helps illustrate this diversity in learning styles. Kolb outlined 4 components of the learning cycle: concrete experience, emphasizing feeling; reflective observation, emphasizing watching; abstract conceptualization, emphasizing thinking; and active experimentation, emphasizing doing, as well as 4 learning styles that relate back to those components. Too much time spent learning in only one component can weaken the learning cycle, as all 4 components are needed for knowledge to truly be transformed. Kolb argues that there are 3 steps that can lead students to develop and use the whole cycle. By the time a student enters college, They will be in the third stage, integration, in which students will learn to express the non-dominant modes of learning. For example, Callie prefers learning by watching and feeling. However, in college, she's learning to integrate doing and thinking for a fuller transformation of knowledge when her professors integrate all four learning components. As I mentioned earlier, research shows that homeschooled students are just as capable of thriving in college. However, there are a few implications when working with homeschooled students to develop this thriving environment. The first is that it's important to remember that homeschooled students come from a variety of backgrounds and have a variety of characteristics, experiences, and personality traits. The second is that the transition away from home can be extra difficult for students whose home lives were directly related to their education. Educators can offer support and encouragement during the transition by encouraging students to be aware of their perceptions of the transition and how the change has affected them. They can also offer programs that are designed to help with the environmental change, such as offering spiritual programs on campus or workshops on how to relate back to your family. A third implication is that educators should encourage exploring identity and building new relationships. This can be done through designing programs that encourage students with little or no experience to try new activities, such as less competitive intramurals or art classes offered to non-art majors. RAs can also encourage homeschooled students to participate in leadership programs that promote self-efficacy. A final implication is that all four components of the learning cycle should be used frequently in partnership with each other. Professors should utilize a variety of teaching methods that highlight all four learning components in a way that moves students through the whole cycle. Constant evaluation should be made about where certain learning styles might be underutilized. Residence life might need to incorporate more thinking and feeling into their programs, while academics might need to incorporate more doing. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I hope you learned something new. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What other theories do you think might have been good to discuss with the subgroup, or how did these observations support your own experience, either as a homeschooled student or interactions that you had with homeschooled students, or how are they different from your experience? What other applications do you feel might be beneficial for educators regarding this population?